Woodwork is not that important to me. My family comes first, my friends come second, and then the woodworking fits in wherever it wants to fit in. But if I can share with others what little bit I know about woodworking, and believe me, I don't know that much about it, not having had any formal training, but yet I think the experience of 40-some years gives me something to say about how I work. In making a chair, the very first thing that I do is select the wood for the seat, and the seat is the very first thing that I make. This is a piece of select lumber. It's a short. It's in the rough, and I usually use pieces 5 inches or narrower for my seats. I'll take and cut this off roughly on the bandsaw, 22 inches long. Now the numbers you see at the ends of these means that off of one board I probably cut off 4, and I mark them with the number of that board. Now here you see this is a beautiful grain, and when I cut into it, I'll freehand cut this on the bandsaw. The grain really comes out very beautifully. Here, for example, this came from the same piece of wood, 3939, but here what I'm going to do is match these 2 pieces of sapwood. And I never use sapwood where this piece would be sapwood up against a dark piece. You see what happens. That isn't at all very nice looking. But this way, it blends in very beautifully. And I've always used sapwood. I'm not at all, in fact, I use it whenever I possibly can. Some of the people I work for don't like the sapwood, but most people let me do pretty much what I want. Now here, this is a very dense piece of wood. You can tell by the weight, and I can tell by the color, but I'll set this aside. Now here's another that came from the same, no, this came from 21, but it has the same coloring in it. I'll match these up. You see how beautiful this is here, how beautiful that is. And then this has the same coloring. I'll match this over on that side there. Here's one that looks pretty much like it would go in there nicely. Let me turn it around this way. Yeah, the grain runs nicely this way. It runs nice that way. Let's look at the back side. Now see, this has sapwood in it. Now you see what I'm getting at. You see the very dark piece here, the sapwood here. Now if this were sapwood and made a beautiful pattern, I'd say fine, but I have to turn this around. And when I cut this on the bandsaw, I won't cut into the sapwood, so I'll be all right. So this will be a set. Now, what I'm going to do, and I'll show here, the centerpiece. Now, this is the centerpiece. And the type of seat that I make, which is very much like a barrel stave, I do cut a 3-degree cut. Now, I'll set my table saw, and I'll make 2 cuts like so. Then, on the 2 on the side, it will be the same thing. I'll make a cut here, but this one cuts this way. And I'll show you why in just a few minutes. Then this cuts this way, and this cuts this way. I set my saw at 4 1/4 inches for this particular chair seat. There you see here that this cut, and I have that cut. Then I take number 4, I come right back, move it over a little bit. Now, say I'm doing a stack of 8 chairs. What I would do, I would not keep setting my saw up. I'd just do one setup, cut each piece, and they'd all come out exactly the same. I'll set these aside over here because I've already done it on these 5. Now, I don't know if you can see what I've done here, but you see an opening here, and these are tight, they're reversed. 3 degrees makes 6 degrees. Now let me take a clamp. I'll dry clamp these, and it'll show you what I'm trying to do here. Now you see what I've done. Now you see what I've done. The next thing I do is mark for my dowels and mark where I'm going to cut out for the front leg, the back leg, the back leg, the front leg here. And I'll show you how I do that. But first I'm going to mark out for my dowels. What I do, I stagger my dowels, and I'll show you what I'm doing after I mark these. Then I go back, and here I just center them. You see they're random. I'm not marking or I'm not measuring anything. I'm just doing it by eye. Now here you see how I've marked the dowels. I've staggered them. If they were in a straight line, it would want to bow one way or the other. But this fights this one fights this one. And contrary to what you may read, they are a leveler, and they do add an awful lot of strength. Now these will be drilled about 1/2 inch from the bottom. These will be drilled right in the middle. I've set my square to this line that I'd marked here, and what I do, I mark each one of the lower ones like this. Now the back one is dead centered, so what I do, mark these, mark that one. Sometimes I have daydreamed and I mark it on the other side, drill the hole, and it means that I have to throw the whole piece away. It's rather annoying. Fortunately, it doesn't happen too often. All right, you may have noticed that I did not joint any of these pieces. I went directly from the saw, dry clamped them, and marked them. The reason I do not joint, if you have a good carbide blade and a good saw, you don't have to joint your wood. I have done, if there's any question, I've done tables 20 feet long, conference tables out of solid wood that I've joined on the saw. I put them together. They haven't, they're as good as the day that I made them. And I'm thinking one that I made about 20 years ago. If you feel that you have to joint your wood, fine, but I find that it is not necessary. I don't. I do joint, so I get one flat piece for sawing, and from there I go to my saw. Now what I'm going to do is drill the lower holes first, and this is very scientific. I don't make jigs. This yardstick happens to work out just right, because this has this 3-degree bevel. The yardstick gives me the right location, and what I'm going to do is drill these holes. Then I take the center one here, reverse it, now I've got to drill this side, but because I have to tip it over, I have to lower my table. Now I can do the back holes with a 1/2 inch bit. People think of me as a chair maker, which is, I don't mind it, but I do make all kinds of furniture. I make chairs, tables, mostly household furniture. I've done offices, I've done churches, but I do like to make chairs, and I've designed about 40, 50 different kinds of chairs. One chair begets many, many chairs. Little hornback chair, I have the original. It's the prototype of that particular chair, and I've refined it over the years. Well, that's it. That is the prototype. We were having dinner one night, and I was sitting next to a lady from Texas, and she asked how people went about ordering my furniture, and I said, I sell everything directly, just you can contact me at home, and I gave her my mailing address later. And she said, I said, is there any particular chair that you are interested in? She said, yes, the one with the horns. And she said, what do you call it? How do I identify it to you? And very quickly, knowing that she was from Texas, I said, oh, that's my Texas chair. I call this room my treehouse room. It's surrounded by trees, as you can see, and then I can see the beautiful mountains to the north of me. It's completely different than the way you see it now. What we did, we brought several chairs that are my wives. I say my wives, they're, I call it Frida's collection. And Frida must have over 100 pieces throughout the house that I've made for her over the years. Let's go over here to this particular chair here. This chair I like an awful lot. You see here how it's made. It looks nice from any direction. A chair shouldn't have a good side, a bad side, or a weak side, I should say. It ought to look good no matter what. I think that a chair should look as beautiful on the bottom as it does on the top. And here you see these are all finished off. The chair seats are all the same on the chairs that I make, except for the depth, the width of them. But as far as the carving of the seats, they're all the same. You see what I've done? Because this is beveled, I get a slant, so I cut it on this side also. Now here you see what I've done, and you see the thickness here. So when you sit, you really get back into the chair where you get real good back support. Now I take this as my pattern and take the one to the right of it, lay it in like so, and I trace. What I'm doing is twisting it through the bandsaw. So I'm looking at three places all at the same time. Right, now you see what I've done. I've cut the middle one, then two outside ones. I've taken an awful lot of wood out with the bandsaw, which makes it a lot easier to grind down with my disc sander. I think that I wouldn't be doing what I am doing if I were not an idealist, but I'm also a realist, and I realize that I do make my living working wood. My little shop supports four families, 5 families, and I would never be able to do that if I were making everything by hand. I do not have a large shop. I've never had more than 2 people working with me. Mike Johnson and Mike O'Neill, who work with me, are very good. They've been with me going on 9 years now. After I've designed, made a piece, they can take it. After I put it together, they can shape and sand, oil on it. But I can say that every piece that has left my shop, I have made. Now the next step will be taking the 2 outside ones you see here, and if you wonder why I didn't cut these at the same time, I've got to have a flat piece when I make the joint here and the joint there. What I have already done, this has been weighting the 2 outside pieces, and you see here I have already cut one of the dados, but all of this will be taken out. I'll cut all of these pieces like so, move my fence over, and clean it out. Now, the next thing I do, I'll take my dado out of my saw and put a blade in, and I will cut this at a 3-degree angle to this point here. This will be a 90-degree cut. This whole piece comes out, and that is for the back leg. This will be a small dining chair, and the legs will splay in at 3 degrees. Now, for my rocking chairs, I make a 5-degree cut. For occasional chairs, a 5-degree cut. I also do a parallel leg. Then, too, by making a cut here, I can bring my legs in at an angle, and I sometimes do that. But there are many ways of putting the legs on together. But remember now, this is the back leg, this is for the front leg. Now what I'm going to do is turn it 3 degrees this way so that I can get the other side. I use this as my measurement stick here. Now we're ready to go. Now you see here the angle on these. Now what I'm going to do is set my saw and cut them off here. The chair evolves as I am making it, and that is the reason I've always felt that the designer should also be the maker. I do not know how you can call yourself a craftsman if you don't make what you design. I'm self-taught, and I learn every single day. Every day that I go out into the shop, I learn something new just by doing. You see what I've done here. I have the dado here where my leg fits in. I have it here, but I still have to do the 3-degree cut on these. And the one at the top will come in like so. I've had special cutters made. The bottom one will do this, and I'm exaggerating. I also have cutters made for 5 degrees for my rocking chairs both ways. You see here the taper of this. Now this is for the top part, and I'll do all the top. I used to do all of this by hand with a chisel and all, and then I used a straight bit, and then I had these custom made. It'd be a little bit impossible to do this with the curve out here, and that's the reason I do these separately, as you see. I've changed to another bit, and I'm doing the bottom. You'll see here what I'm doing here now. I'll check this out first, though. People have asked me what wood I prefer, and I do prefer the walnut. Woods such as Macassar ebony, maple, teak, oak, I call them unfriendly woods, because when you make a joint, the joint has to be very, very precise. There's no give to it. Where the walnut is mellow, it's friendly, it's a sensuous wood, I think. But I do like the maple. I think I get tired of having a whole room of maple, but I think one piece really stands out nicely. People have asked me how comfortable are the chairs, and the proof of the pudding is sit in one. It gives you very good lower back support, it gives you good shoulder support. I mentioned the different types of legs that I make. For example, on the rocker over there, the leg curves where it gives you very good head support, and it also gives you very good lower back support. And then the chair that I'm sitting on, you can see how this leg curves back. And they both function the same, but I happen to like this one an awful lot, where I can just sit and relax, go to sleep. This is one of the about 12 different designs of rocking chairs that I make. It's one of the most popular ones. And then this is another here. You see it's the same, except this curves out and this curves in. I like them both. Now, let me show you the pattern that I use for this particular one here. I have all kinds of patterns here. You can see the different names that I have on the patterns. That over there is a trestle leg table. This is even a smaller one. This is the pattern that I use for the leg. Now you wonder what these round things are. When I first started, somebody was showing me how to use a shaper, and I noticed that when he started, he tore out the end, and it was sort of shaky because this is quite narrow here. So I decided to put a pipe plate in where this lays on the table as I push it through the shaper, and it keeps my hand away from the cutters. Then as it goes through, I have this to hold, and it's a safety factor. All I do is use just little brads to hold the pattern onto the leg. But here you'd see different things. Here are patterns. Well, here's one of my legs that I shaped for a swivel chair, and this is walnut. I make a lot of swivel chairs. I make residential swivel chairs that are small. I've done them upholstered, spindle back, wood seat and all. But this particular one will be upholstered seat and upholstered back. It has a nice flow of the arm, as you see here. The hard line comes up, goes along the arm, follows here, up and around, comes back, and it dies out here. I cannot draw it. I know what I'm going to do when I start making the chair. Now, this is going to be an upholstered piece, and Keith Dixon, who's been doing my upholstery for nearly 40 years, will be doing it. And let me show you how that works. First, though, let me show you the seat. I have it here. This is the seat. I use alder wood. This happens to be poplar, where tacks can go into it very easy, or staples. But this is fit very carefully, and it fits in here in a little groove that runs all the way around the chair. Then the back I make out of plywood and poplar. You see here how it works. And here, this is the little channel that I have, 5/8 of an inch deep. And it's only at the top. You see here where I brought this out, the bottom and the side. That keeps it from falling through. Now let me show you. I'll put it in, and it'll give you an idea. It works very nicely. It just pops in like that. And no screws or anything from the bottom. Then when you want to take it out, of course it'll fit a little tighter, and you take your thumbs here, and just pop it out. You can oil the furniture, dust it, or whatever. I usually take the pieces to Dick's shop and talk about what I want, but he's done so many. I'm going to send one of the fellows that works for me. What I want, I'm going to mark this. And I want 1/4 inch foam on the back, and I want it pulled over. Then here in the front, what I want is 2 inches at the head, and I want it to come down about here, and then here I want 1 inch. Let's just mark it like so. And then here, about 2¼ inches, maybe 2½ inches, but I'll have buttons across here, and then I want buttons across here, like so. And then I don't want it to look too heavy, so the seat is going to be 1.5 inches. And that's it, okay? Here you see where I have cut the dado on the front leg that slides in to the dado that I've made there. And I do this on the table saw. Now you wonder why I have 2 of them. After I did this, I decided that I wanted the leg a little bit longer, so I just made another dado. And this isn't destroyed. I'll show you. I cut that out, and it doesn't hurt a thing. But before I do that, let me route it out here. You see, I've used a 1/2 inch round over with a 1/2 inch bearing, and this is what I've gotten here. That is a 1/2 inch round over. Now, when I did this, it was a 1/4 inch rabbet with a 1/2 inch bearing. So what happens is that this fits in absolutely perfectly. What I'm going to do now is go over to the bandsaw. I don't like the turn. It's awful dusty and dirty, even though I have an exhaust fan and all. That's one of the few things that I don't like about woodworking. Bob Stocksdale shudders when he watches me turn. I use a round, flat scraper. I never used a gouge, but I can turn quite rapidly. Now this shows what I've done on the bandsaw. I've taken the corners off. It saves an awful lot of time. I can turn one of these legs in about 5 minutes. The hole that you see here at this end and the hole here at this end is where the dowel that goes into the arm, the other is for the rocker. Then, of course, I attach these to the chair frame, and I clamp from this point across the top, and from this point across the bottom to keep the legs from splaying out. I'm going to show just a tiny bit of how I shape this into the leg. I was approached by a company. They would purchase my pieces, manufacture them as close as he could to what I did. If everything had gone the way it should have, my stake in it would have been around $22 million. But I was much younger then, and I'm glad that I didn't do it. I think it might have been the end of what I really wanted to do. When you design for individuals, you have a free hand. When you design for the machine, and this is production, you design for the machine. There's so much handwork in my pieces that they would have to make changes and all, and it would no longer be my work. A machine doesn't have any soul, and the pieces look like they're stamped out, where you do it by hand, and part of you, much of you, goes into that particular piece. And I must say, Bob Stocksdale would be awful teed off at me if I didn't mention that he makes all my plugs. And so he's part of whatever I do. I met Frida at the Claremont Graduate School in Claremont. She was I had leave of absence from the Indian Service to get her MFA, and she never went back to the Indian Service. She married me, and she gave up her career. She painted, she did weaving, ceramics, and all. But from the day that we married, she's been my partner, and she's kept everything running and humming. Without her, as I mentioned before, I just don't think that I would be doing what I'm doing. I wanted over the years to keep my prototypes if there was just no way. Many times Frida would come in when I was starting and would mention something about, well, you have to pay a bill, do you have anything that is finished? And invariably somebody would want a piece, so we would sell it. So most of the prototypes that I made over the years are gone. And I do have, though, quite a few of them in the house. This piece here I call a print rack. It's wooden hinges. I usually, whenever I read something that I think that other people would be interested in, I underline it and just lay it on the stand. It has a small drawer, and then this lever here works where you can loosen it and lower it or bring it up flat as a work table, but you can put it at any level you want. And it's a wooden hinge. But this mechanism, I'll take this off. I drilled a 1-inch hole, and then I set Paduk in and drilled it, and then this is a wooden thread. Now these I just cut out on the bandsaw. I don't know if you can see it very well or not. I cut this out on the bandsaw and then just sand it on my spindle sander. It takes me just a few minutes to do, and then this screws in here like so. I don't know if I've been influenced by anybody's architecture. I just did it. It's rather an organic house. I built the house myself. I had help, whoever was working with me at the time, but this was quite an undertaking for just one person. Building the rail around, my wife wouldn't let me cut the roof out until the whole upstairs was finished. We live in the middle of a 6-acre lemon grove, and our house and shop are situated in the middle. And then my son, who's also a woodworker, who'd worked for me or with me for many years, and then decided about 10 years ago that he should go on his own, lives on the corner of the property. So our family is very well contained here. This is one of the little spots that remains the same as it was many years ago. From the thousands of acres of citrus and vineyards that we had surrounding us, I do not believe there's over 20 acres of citrus left in the whole area. We've grown from a small city, or little village, you might say, of a few hundred people to nearly 100,000 people. The sad thing about the whole situation is that they've planned a freeway now for 20 years, and it goes through our house, it goes through our shop. Because our house is not over 50 years old, it cannot be designated in the National Registry, but people are working on it. The yarn that I cut out yesterday, I made the blanks, and here you see the blanks here, and this will sit like so. So I have to make a compound cut there, and I will mark this with a pencil, or I'll just take my compass, seeing how and I just make a mark like so, and I come back here, and now I'll go over to my saw, and I'll cut along that line, and it ought to be perfect. Once in a while, it takes me 2 or 3 cuts. I put a center dowel, or a center dowel here, tap it, and drill my hole. Now what I've done, I've made this pattern that has a straight edge on it so that I could cut this bevel. I surely couldn't this way. There'd be no way that I could do it. Now when I go to do the other arm, what I do is set this up against the fence like so, bring my fence up to it, and here it's hitting this point and it's hitting this point. And I'll cut all the arms that has this angle, then I'll do the other arms. This is the left arm, then I do the right arms. But here you see, now I've made this cut that goes into the back leg. I've used a dowel center to find the center here. I've drilled my half-inch hole and I followed this line because this arm does that. Then I lay out my pattern. You can see here the line. And I will cut this out on the bandsaw. I recommend that you do not use the bandsaw the way I'm using it. It's very dangerous. You shouldn't do it. I do it because I didn't know any better when I started. No one had told me that I shouldn't do it. But I do cut a lot of freehand. I cut the arms, I cut the crest. I do an awful lot of freehand cutting on the bandsaw. I use the bandsaw as a pencil, really, as a design instrument. But I can't repeat too often. I recommend that you not do it. It is risky. Now what I've done is pretty much shaped this on the bandsaw. I've left this the way it is because I've got to put a clamp from this, from the top of the arm to the bottom of the leg. I used to finish this all up and then I'd have to make a wedge and put sandpaper on it to keep it from slipping and all. I find that it's much simpler doing it this way than taking a chisel and just knocking that off. It just takes me a few minutes. But you see the arm is pretty well shaped. I have the hard line here that I'll shape much cleaner when I go to the vise. The rocker is the chair that people order individually more than any other piece that I make. So we always have a few going. I usually do 6 rockers at a time, and that's about my limit. Then I let them set a while, and then come back to another 6 later on. But I have quite a few dining table sets to make, chairs, buffets. I have 2 church jobs coming up. People have asked me what my favorite piece of furniture is, and my answer is that whatever piece I'm working on. This has been attached. You see this big hunk of wood here. What I do is blend 2 parts. I blend the arm into the leg so it becomes one. When I'm doing a chair that I've not done before, I go ahead and shape the whole thing as I'm doing here, the arms, everything. It'll be in a rough state, but I have defined my forms, and then I take it in, and 2 young men that have worked for me for a long time go ahead and scrape and sand on it. If I'm doing a series of chairs, I will go ahead and rough them in, and then give them to them. That lets me go to something else. Working alone, I could produce it easily 25, 30 pieces a year. This way we can produce about 50 to 60 pieces. I've made tables like this. People kept telling me that it would look very organic. It looked like a tree trunk growing out of the ground. And it wasn't until we had a horrendous rain here, and it just washed all the dirt away from eucalyptus trees. And here you saw these beautiful roots. And as we were driving to church one Sunday morning, Peter said, "Sam, your table pedestal." But here you see the understructure. This leg has the hip joint, and the center core has the dado, and these slip into it. You can see here, you can see here, you can see here. They're very hard to see. And then what I do is I put a clamp here and here, here and here, and then a clamp from this leg to that one, a clamp from that leg to that one, and the same at the top. Then when I put the top on, there's a screw in there, and I drill a hole much larger than the screw, drop a washer in, so there's movement on the table. The table can move about 1/2 inch. Now let me show you a larger version. This is a larger version. Here you see the tongue that slides down into the dado. I do not have the center core made yet, but that's usually made out of 4x4 and then coved. So this slide goes in, you see a beautiful cove, and this will just slide down. Looking at it, it would be about this far apart. And I take my router about 1 inch deep and hammer a spline in, peg it, and then on the other direction, I go in 1/2 inch. So what I do, I get a beautiful cross piece like so that holds it together. I don't have to do that on the top because the top holds it together. Now this is a trestle, is going to be a, I call this a trestle table. Now the way this is clamped, this part here is clamped the same way as the little table is. This is a dado joint here with the tongue and the tongue. That is done first, connecting it on to this piece here. And then you notice the cove. And we do that by hand. What I do is just take a gouge and gouge it out. And then I take a sureform that I've made into a little plane, a round sureform, and that's the way we do that. Then you see here what I've done. I've brought the legs out like so a little bit. You see the little cove here, and then you see the spline, and the spline curves with the leg. So what I did, I used this as my guide for my router, and then on this I went in 3/4 of an inch deep, and here again I have my pegs that hold it so that the legs, when they're down, a lot of weight is put on it, it'll not split out here. Even if this were a dovetail, the weight on it would be just too much for it, but the spline takes care of all of that. Mike, this looks great. Are you just about ready to oil it?
Just gonna put some.
All right. Well, then why don't you let me kind of see here. You know, this I love this chair, and we've got what 5 more of them to make. This goes to a young lady up in Portland, Oregon. Why don't you blow it off and then let's get ready to oil it? Okay.
Sure.
All right. What I do, I've had so many people ask me about the finish that I use on my furniture, and I've used it for 40 years, over 40 years. I use a varnish, a raw tongue oil, and boiled linseed oil, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. But I had so many inquiries about how to do it. The woodwork store contacted me and asked if they could package it, and so they do package it, and I use what they put up. It's exactly the same finish that I'd used before, but it makes it quite handy. I don't have to mix it anymore. And that is the first finish that I put on, and I put about 4 rubbings on, wipe it off absolutely completely. You can't leave any oil on at all. Let it set for a day or 2 and repeat 3 times. I then take my tongue oil, linseed oil, and wax finish and apply that the same way. Rub it off completely. This gives you a very beautiful satiny finish. And I do not use the final, I do not use the wax on tabletops, because if you put something hot on the wax finish, it might leave a ring. You recall this chair, before it was upholstered, before it was oiled, I've taken it to the upholster and he's put the fabric on. It still has to be oiled a little bit more, but let me explain some of the features of this particular chair. You see here where I made a large roll here, a small roll here. The cushion underneath, and I will remove it, is finished with the same fabric as is the top. I do not like the chrome. I think I'll cover it with walnut like so. There'll be a walnut core and this will be covered and it'll give it a little more weight. But I think that the people I'm doing this for will be quite happy with it. I'm quite happy with it. I kind of think I'll make one for myself rather than sit in a rocking chair. I've always felt that people should be surrounded by beautiful objects, objects that they really love. I do not think you have to purchase name pieces. If one can, they should help young craftsmen, young painters in getting started. We became interested in American Indian art because of my wife's experience in the Indian service for many, many years. But throughout the whole house, I think of the man or the lady who made that particular piece. So it brings us into friendly contact daily. And I think this is what life is all about. The carousel horses I like very much. These are Parker horses. I stripped them. I wanted to see the carving, but the simplicity of these, without the paint, you see the carving, even though the bodies were pretty much made on a wood carving machine. The fish, the tail, the heads were always carved by a master carver. They are an example of the woodworker at his very best. What I'm doing here is marking my cutting line for the spindles. And on my rocking chairs, I put 7 or 8 spindles in. This particular rocking chair, I'm going to put 7 in. My dining chairs, I use 5, and then on my side chairs, I use 6. These are the patterns that I use. This is the original that I've used for many, many years. It hasn't gotten broken, and that's the reason I have it marked original. When I lay my spindles out, I gang them up on a piece of wood that is in the rough. I do not plane it. I cut them out very rough. Then after they're cut, I run it over the jointer, and then I cut to the line that I've made, which is this pattern here, like so. Then after that is done, I will run this through my planer for the thickness that I want. The spindles are always the same thickness. Then here you see where I have marked them with this pattern here. And this is what I end up with. This happens to be a piece of teak, and this is in the rough. Then the next step, I will sand this on my spindle sander, sand this edge on my spindle sander. Then I take my router and I route this so you have a nice round. It gives you very good lower back support. When you sit back, this goes right into the small of your back very nicely. Here what I'm doing is bringing this out so where it's exactly 5 degrees. I've used a good heavy piece of wood. I've used a piece of 10/4 so that I get a real nice round on the back. Like so. Here I have a perfect fit. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make an arc, and I'll cut this out on the bandsaw. Now this is the way I lay out my spindles, just the way I'm holding my pencil, just eyeballing it. I just scribe a line like so. I find the center. Then what I do, I divide this into 7 equal parts, and I mark it on this side, bring it over, put it into my chair like so. I've marked the bottom holes with an awl, and of course these are all marked here. I take my finger at each mark, then I drill, and I have a stop here. Then I go to the next one, and I hold my finger where I marked it, and I'm going to exaggerate, but this will cant out this way. Then I go to the next one, and this cants out. I go to the next one, but I just eyeball all of these. I had a ladder going up to the loft, which was rather clumsy. Then I decided to build a spiral stairway. A young friend of mine came by with a load of lumber. It was apatone, which isn't a good wood for furniture, so I decided to make the stairway out of it. I made the steps, and they laid around here for about 2-3 years. Then I just decided to finish it. It took me about 2 weeks to make it from start to finish. One morning, I was getting ready for church. I was all dressed, and I went into the shop, picked up a rasp, and Frida came out and wondered what I was doing. And I said, well, I'm shaping this finial. It took me about half an hour to shape it, and I just all of a sudden got an idea of what I wanted, and I did it. This is my form that I make my rockers on. I have a smooth formica that's been waxed and all. I've had this for many, many years. You can see here all the glue on it. I've used this for about 30 years. But what I do, I use 6 pieces. This teeth with a piece of ebony in the middle. And this will go in here like so. And after it's glued, I pull it in, and then I go ahead and add my clamps. And I do it very, very fast. And today, being a hot day, the glue's going to set up rather fast, so I can't dally. Now the teak hasn't been treated at all. It's been sawn on the saw. It hasn't been jointed. It has not been planed, just the saw cut. Here I'm doing the ebony one, and that's just for a little highlight. Mike, you want to come in here a minute, please? Come over and finish this up while I explain something else, okay? It's awful hot, so you have to kind of do it fast. This is bird's eye, and here you see this has been jointed. It's been run through the jointer, or the thickness planer, so I get the correct thickness. And then here, I don't have a pattern. I just do this on the bandsaw. I do this on the bandsaw. But before I do any of the shaping, what I do is drill my hole for the back leg, drill a hole for the front leg, and because the cant is 5 degrees, this is drilled at a 5-degree cant. Then I take my router, a bow nose, and I just drop the whole thing. This is round here, and then this is shaped afterwards. This is shaped into the leg, this is shaped into the leg, and then of course this I do with a rasp. That's pretty much the way we do these. Now these little blocks over here, this will go at the back here. These will be glued on after all of these are glued, and I use 7 of them. And then on the front I use 8 because I want the front canted back just a tiny bit. And then of course these are cut in shape. I guess if you can't sit on a chair, or can't eat off of a table, or can't use a set of drawers, it's art. Today I have a lot of friends who hand you a card and it's artist in wood or everything but being a woodworker. And I don't consider myself an artist, I never have. I'm a furniture maker, I'm a woodworker, and I think woodworker is a very good word, and I like the word. It's an honest word, and that is what I am, a woodworker. I'm doing this just to illustrate. Now, this would all be finished, rounded. The hole would be drilled in the leg. This would all be shaped in here, and all. This would be shaped, cut off evenly. And then what I would do is place these where I wanted them, mark them, and then I would drill my hole. I can pretty well tell how to adjust it. I can bring it forward or backward, but it should be a sort of a perpetual rocking when I do it. And a rocking chair should never throw you out, or it shouldn't flip you back. On a finished rocker, I can touch it on the saw table. It'll just keep rocking back and forth for an awful long time. But that's the way I make my rockers. Too often, we who design things take all credit for what we do. And if we have any kind of success, we become very smug and conceited about it. And I think that all one has to do is look at a beautiful flower or a tree or whatever, and we realize that what we do is very insignificant. We are only the instruments who make these beautiful objects.
Here are scenes from the Taunton Press video workshops featuring fellow enthusiasts. Dovetail a drawer and making mortise and tenon joints with Frank Klaus. Repairing furniture and refinishing furniture with Bob Flexner. Radial arm saw joinery with Curtis Erpelding. Bowl turning with Del Stubbs, and also turning wood with Richard Raffin. A third take with Klaus, wood finishing. Carving, techniques and projects with Sam Bush and Mac Headley. Chip carving with Wayne Barton. Router jigs and techniques with Bernie Moss and Michael Fortune. Making kitchen cabinets with Paul Levine. Small shop tips and techniques with Jim Cummins. And the three-part series, tiling floors, tiling walls, and tiling countertops with Michael Byrne.